The BumbleKast is for entertainment purposes only. The host's comments and opinions, and those of their guests, are wholly their own and do not represent that of any other entity. Content is provided as is, with no guarantees of accuracy or timeliness.
Welcome to a special edition of the BumbleKast. I'm your host, Ian Flynn, the Bumble King, and joining me as always is my Bumble co-host, Kyle, JCRB Kraus.
I'm here, but even though I'm here, we have a guest today. We have a special guest. Welcome to Nick.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm a comic creator, so as you can imagine, I somewhat relate to this, and I basically grew up reading Ian's work. So here I am.
And I feel old. Welcome!
Immediately, right off the bat. We are old, Ian. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
That's never going to change, really.
That's okay.
I'm waiting for the day that I do a show and somebody brings their kid up and I grew up reading my work and I introduced my kid to your work. And it's like, oh, good. I'm very old now. I'm multi-generational. Lovely.
It's true.
It's enough about me. Tell us about you.
Well, I'm a comic creator. I write and draw and design my own work, and I've been releasing books for the better part of a decade now. And I just released my 10th book this year. I'm already working on the 11th one, and I'm going to be at it for at least another decade because the story's only half done. So I'm already, I'm about to turn 34, and I'm already picturing, wait a second. By the time I wrap this up, I'm going to be in my mid-40s, at least. And already I can just, see myself aging like that gif from The Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
No. Shoot, dude, I'm trying to get Dragoon out here in my mid-40s. It's book one of many. But tell us about your book, what your books, plural, that you've got out there.
Okay. Well, it's a series called Planet Ripple, and, I'm autistic, and I wanted to represent people like myself, and not just my struggles, but those of, other neurodivergent people, and show us going through the same things that, neurotypicals do, survivor's guilt, depression, mood swings, anxiety, grief, all that, just with that extra sensory filter that comes with conditions like these that make our struggles a little different, but without making us seem, alien. The basic premise is, it's many thousands of years from now. The world's been flooded for most of that time, but new islands start popping up left and right. So there's a gold rush over who gets first rights to the new world. And the wealthy and powerful want it all for themselves. So they hire a pirate army to reserve the land for them. Just let everybody else drown. Keep their hands off it. And Minnow gets involved. She becomes a navy ensign and eventually leads a charge against the pirates and their masters herself, all while dealing with multiple disabilities, mental and physical, and her traumas. And, that's the gist of it.
Cool. I'm sold.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I dig that
Thank
concept.
All right, we'll leave time to plug later, but where can folks find this?
Oh, well, all the links are on my website. They can get a paperback version through Amazon. It's print on demand. There's also a Kindle version. And for people who swore off of Amazon, they can get the PDFs through itch.io. I've also released the first book for free through that platform because the way I see it, 150 pages is plenty of time to tell a good story. If you can't get someone hooked in that time, then it was never going to be their thing. And, so far the strategy's worked out pretty well for me.
What's your website, real quick?
PlanetRipple.com.
PlanetRipple.com. Okay, cool.
Yeah, we can get into all that stuff later. This is your podcast, after all.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a really good elevator pitch, and it's I kind of want to know about it more now. So strike while the iron is hot.
I'm sold. Let's get people on board that. Go check that out.
Thank you. I do have quite a bit to say about it, but I figured that might be a little later in the podcast, unless you're okay with me info dumping.
Your episode, man. Take it at your pace.
Yep. Whatever you'd like to do, whatever you want to talk about right now, we can talk about it.
We can talk about that stuff a little later. First, I would like to talk a little about what you do. So my first question, how did the process of writing comics change from fan comics to professional work? How'd that transition go, irrespective of subject matter?
Just having the guidance of someone who knew the industry and knew the format and knew what was expected of the writer. And, doing fan comics is a great learning tool and a great way to begin to learn the process yourself. But until you have those outside factors like your page count limitations or the editor overseeing and weighing in on your work, or a licensor having a say, deadlines, not self-imposed deadlines, the printer needs this by now deadlines, those all contribute to how the process goes and how you think about it and how you work with it. And just a degree of discipline that came down to it, how to format better, how to speak to the art team better, how to better organize my thoughts, how to pace things out reasonably for the foreseeable future. Just a whole bunch of learning on how to refine the craft.
Okay. That kind of bleeds into the next question. Do you ever plan a page around a specific panel layout?
Sometimes, not often, though. There will be an occasion where I have a very particular sequence in mind, or there's one definitive moment that I want highlighted. So I have to figure out how to get there within the page and still maintain that one moment. But most of the scripts I do are for just the whole story itself. Not necessarily building to a singular moment, but telling the whole story.
Right. I realize, this is one of the reasons why I went for self-publishing. It wasn't simply that I didn't think that I could cut it, like getting a real publisher, but self-publishing gives you a degree of freedom. Like you were constrained by having to fit everything within 22 pages exactly.
Right.
Some comics only have 20 pages if they want a little more ad space. And
that's what the current standard is in most projects. Yeah. And you had, with some of the projects, is the story has to be 4 issues long.
Oh, it's worse than last time I looked.
It's worse than you imagined.
Depends on the project.
Used to be you could get like a 6-issue, sometimes even 7-issue paperback of something like Ultimate Spider-Man.
No.
Wow. So yeah, the comics industry, it just seems to be getting a little more brutal over time. But the thing about that 22 or even 20 page format, it gets mixed results because you either have to cram a bunch of stuff within 22 pages or 20, or you might not have that much to work with and end up having to kind of pad out. And I've seen this, in some comics, like unrelated comics, by other writers. Like this one Star Wars thing that had this crazy, it was only like a page and a half with like 3 panels of these guys jumping around with lightsabers and all these big walls of texts. So in the time that it would take them to say all of this, you have to imagine them doing like 25 other flippy doos by the time they're finished. It's it's congested.
It kind of you to divert the bullet, but I am guilty of this myself. There have been stories that really didn't need to be 4 issues long that really could have benefited from being 5. That wasn't up to me and did the best I could at the time. But, you can always look back and say, should have done this differently, could have done this better. If I had thought of this, that, or the other, I could have switched it up.
It's why I appreciate that for a little while there was this strategy of like, oh, we'll just have like a couple of shorter stories. One can be like 15 pages, one can be 5 or 7 pages, only as long as it needs to be. Because that's the thing about like self-publishing is if I only need 12 pages for a specific chapter, I can make it that short. If I need 35 pages, I could just make it a longer chapter because it's just like the one big book. And that freedom has allowed me to make it flow almost like a storyboard. Like I try to make it easy to imagine it animated. Okay, next question. Who's your favorite character who's a scumbag? Just the worst.
Oh, there's so many good ones out there.
It really is. It really is.
First one that pops into mind is David Xanatos out of Gargoyles.
Oh,
That's a really good one.
he's polished to a mirror shine. He's
and that
impossibly suave, but he has his redemption later, but early on, no, he's a bad man, and we love it.
One of the characters that just came to mind for me was Ridley. Of course, in the Metroid games, he doesn't talk, but in the manga, he talks. And there's this bit where, like, once he realizes who Samus is, like as an adult, he starts mocking the memory of her parents. And he's like, "Ooh, I wonder where your mother's cells ended up in my body. Could they be like here or maybe here?" And he's like pointing at his arm and other places. I'm
wow,
like, dude,
wow,
that's really mean.
That's rude.
It's funny. Characters like Ridley, at least where they're not animated, like, okay, this is going way off track, but like in the Hobbit movies, I wondered how the heck they would make Smaug talk. Turns out they just made him stretch his lips the way we do. But lizards in real life can't do that. All they can really do is like hang their mouths open. So I always imagine when characters like Ridley speak that they would just be like awkwardly holding their mouths open and using their throat muscles to make the sounds like a bird or something. So it's just
extra creepy.
Yeah, that makes it weirder.
You just hear this voice coming out of him while he stares at you, his face unmoving.
With just that little bit of emotion in there, like in the Smash Brothers reveal trailer, that smirk he gives while he's twirling Mario's hat. It isn't a big emote, but it's an effective one.
Yeah, definitely.
Also, Funny Bone out of the Bone series, who just continually fails upward, and you really, really, really want him to get his comeuppance, and then it comes, and it's very satisfying. And the next scheme he gets on is like, "Oh, you idiot, you never learn. I'm going to look forward to this inevitably caving in on you."
I'd say GLaDOS from the Portal games kind of fits this. He's just a smug jerk.
Even more so in the second game, where she's vengeful. But at the same time, you're like, okay, I can see why you're mad.
I get it, but...
How are you? I'm a potato.
Yes.
And by that same token, Wheatley, his villain arc is delightful.
Yes. Wheatley is a lot of fun.
Okay, so this is actually my last question. I didn't have that many. Anyway, were there plans for future Mega Man comics that you were disappointed you didn't get around to doing?
Oh, yeah. I had everything plotted out through Mega Man 11.
Oh, wow.
Like everything. Not like down to the individual issues, but the plot beats and where we were going in general. And was especially excited to get to Mega Man 4. That's what pretty much the run was kind of building towards, because that's when the first like real heavy story hits. And it's like, all right, here we go. We've done all the setup. Let's rock. What do you mean we don't have the license?
Oh, no.
I was impressed by how you handled the, what's it called, Ra Moon. Just so when like basically all the world's electronics shut down, you just have that shot of Blues like looking in the distance. You see a plane crashing. You see, about to crash. You see like the lights go out in a hospital as someone's performing surgery. And it's like, oh my god, I never knew the classic series could be this high stakes and dark. That kind of thing's not supposed to happen until the X series, at least.
It's all about extrapolation and letting the reader fill in the blanks, because what you come up with is going to be far worse than anything I put immediately in front of you.
Yeah, that's what I appreciate about like the limitations of comics that are still like family friendly. There's a certain point where I see like superhero comics, even stuff like Green Lantern, where there's all this alien gore, so many fluids splaying across the frame, and it just gets a little boring after a while, But something where you don't get to see everything, where you just have to, where you force the viewer to imagine it, it's what makes me still remember scenes like that.
Right, yeah.
Because that very specific scene, like, it took me a while to come up with, what are some non-violent family-friendly scenes that still get the point across of why a global blackout would be a catastrophic event. And again, just put those pieces there and let you fill in the blanks. Like, yeah, the plane's going to fall because there's no power. But what does that mean? The hospital's out of power. What does that mean? And you put the pieces together. You lead yourself to those conclusions, and you're like, oh no.
So, again, that's all of my questions, but there's some other stuff I'd like to talk about. So, this is a bit of a tangent, but the 2000s. There's a lot I didn't like about that era, but one thing that I do appreciate about it was all this pop culture stuff that kind of went through a facelift. It's like, oh, it's a new millennium. We got to reinvent this and we got to rebrand that and for like the next generation. And for me, like, at the age I was at the time when I first really started consuming pop culture stuff, that was fun. Like part of the fun of following the Ultimate Spider-Man comics was seeing, which of his classics rogues gallery would appear like in the next volume with a crazy new design and backstory. Same thing with the Batman, that cartoon. A big part of the appeal was the art style. Seeing Joker look like a jester, and Mr. Freeze just this skinny, emaciated dude in a big ice body. Like Transformers, with stuff like Armand and Energon and so on. It was normal for the characters to look nothing like their Generation 1 namesakes. And it was normal for them to get an entire new body every year and just have the same name, or even a different name. Stuff like Bionicle, that had a rotating cast. Every couple years, we saw a new team of heroes. Power Rangers, every season after a while had a beginning, middle, and end, and its own themes and cast. And then you have stuff like Mega Man, where part of the fun of each new Battle Network game was seeing which robot masters would get a slick new NetNavi design. And even like on a broader scope, there were so many different Mega Man series with their own art styles and motifs and gameplay tweaks and atmosphere. And that's something that I do miss about that time. Like as an autistic person, we do have a stereotype of hating change, of just wanting everything to stay the same forever. But when I was growing up, everything was always changing. Change was the constant. So nothing really stayed the same long enough to become nostalgic. And so that's oddly the thing that I'm nostalgic about, was the lack of nostalgia and the constant freshness.
I like that perspective. That's not one I have heard before, but I appreciate it.
Thanks. It's just I've noticed, like, in more recent years, it's like with stuff like Transformers. When I was a kid, whatever was airing on TV at the time, whatever the cartoon was, that got the most support, top billing, the sturdiest toys, because kids were the focus, and adult collectors were kind of an afterthought. That market hadn't really formed yet. Now it's flipped. Now, you have toy lines focusing mostly on adult collectors buying stuff from when they were a kid, but maybe with more paint and articulation, or even less paint. And kids are the ones who just get, table scraps. And that just rubs me the wrong way. Like even something like Fully Charged. You look at Mega Man's silhouette, and it's basically the classic design. And like if you deviate from something nostalgic that like grown-ups had as a kid, they get angry about it on the internet. So it's just much harder for something truly new and creative, just using some old characters and elements to get off the ground now. It's like there's no room for it if it isn't nostalgic.
Yeah, I can see evidence of that. And that's why when folks will ask, on the show or in like interviews or school groups or stuff, how do you break into the industry? Because I really want to do such and such with this franchise. I tell them, for now, do your own thing. Make something new. Forge a new path, because we do need that injection of new ideas. And, if the market itself is not going to cater to it, then create a new market, Yeah.
One thing that like really bummed me out about the Mega Man comics being canceled. So, I was enjoying the classic stuff well enough, but then that final issue came out where, Dr. Light, he sees the future, and he basically sees like every other series in that timeline. And what really blew me away was how well, was handled in the writing. Just the commentary on things like the Elf Wars and the ZX era, where humans and Reploids were becoming more alike, where Reploids were a bit fleshier and they had built-in lifespans, expiration dates, and humans are all cyborgs now. They have these weird giant squares jammed into their heads where their ears should be, and these like skin suits that are grafted to their bodies, and they wear normal clothes over those. And then, the Legends games, like in the ZX series, it's like he could no longer tell who was a human or who was a Reploid, except I guess the triangle stamped on Reploid foreheads. But then like the Legends era where, oh, man and machine have become one. And I'm like, holy crap. He put together that like carbons are just humans and Reploids put together. This guy gets it. And that made me like really regret that he didn't get to write anything after that. Because I thought, this is in good hands. If this guy ever did like a more X comics or a Zero comic or ZX or Legend, he'd know how to handle it.
Well, thank you.
Good thing you got a Zero comic coming up, Ian.
Yeah, and I'm very happy for that opportunity, but it's also, that one.
Just one. Yeah, I know.
That really scratches the itch.
I think like Zero overall is like one of the best stories in this series, but it takes a while to get off the ground. Like we don't even learn about the inciting incident that, oh, there's an energy crisis and we need someone to scapegoat. So, just kill all the old Reploids. We don't learn about that until the second game when you think we should know about that, from the beginning. But whatever. Overall, it's like a continuous story over those 4 games. It's pretty great. And even ZX, that's basically 0, 5, and 6. But the thing I appreciate about that is like after these other games were getting so dark, ZX starts out as a bright, happy, colorful future. And it's like, aw, the world Seal wanted to create, she did it. She actually made it happen. And you have the giant holographic flowers everywhere that are her design. And then, the bad guy's trying to kill everybody and feed them to his god machine. Which is basically just the vengeful spirit of an old man, like the Maverick virus, like always.
Oh man.
That and by ZX, it finally kind of branches off into its own thing. It's not because part of at least to me, part of the tragedy and darkness of Zero, the series, is this sense of lingering and hanging on. Copy X and Zero, who is so divorced from his original self that they're almost different characters, that he has fought for so long and has become more or less the weapon he was meant to be, just not aimed exactly as Wily intended. And it's like, let it die. Let it be done. Let the fighting finally conclude so they can rest. And you get that with ZX. And then you have a kind of rebirth in Legends where it's a new generation and it's a new direction. And there is that sense of hope and openness and exploration, a new renaissance of sorts. So that bright, shiny, happy, classic era, and then it all falls apart by Zero. And then you have the somewhat regrowth in ZX, and then it's fully realized in Legends. It's a very interesting tangent that the Mega Man legacy has taken.
And not just in ZX, but in ZX Advent, I could see that they were building up to Legends. They were trying to, make the transition from humans and Reploids to Carbons, and I still feel like there were more spaces that could have been filled in between those games that sadly, most likely never will, because these are sadly more niche series. But that's one of the things that I loved about, following those games throughout the 2000s. As another follower of the BumbleKast said in an article that's really stuck with me, being a Mega Man fan at that time was a dream come true. You were never more than a few months away from another one. And, if you only liked one series like X or Zero or whatever, then you wouldn't get much out of the other stuff. But I liked all of it. I even liked Battle Network and Star Force. So I was eating good. And then it all dried up around the same time.
It all went away. It's like, well...
And then we got one new game, and there was this hope for a little while that there might be more, and then it dried up again. And, well, at least we have the collections. But, that one of the things that I missed about that time was, like, Star Force was the last time we had a new art direction, with a constellation theme, and space, and radio waves. And that's really, again, one of the things I miss, was just that reinvention. Always finding a way to surprise us. Anyway, so, yeah, going back a ways, I trust that, had you been given the opportunity, had you been allowed to make it that far, you would have handled, things like that approach to the singularity in this ongoing sci-fi soap opera. So anyway, one last Mega Man related thing, and this is less to do with the cyberpunk transhumanist elements of the main timeline. and more so with the Battle Network and Star Force timeline. It's funny. Last year I was at a convention and I met Brad Swale, who voices Lan, in the cartoon.
Okay.
I found that with actors and voice actors especially, they appreciate it when you bring up some of the slightly more obscure roles.
Yeah.
Because it does get a bit tiresome having to answer the same questions every time. That's why, I didn't actually bring that many questions here, because I didn't want to ask you, what's your favorite kind of cake? That you probably have answered a bunch of times already.
Yeah, but we like talking about cake.
But at this event, you had Brad Swale, you had Brian Drummond, so it was Death Note themed. So of course I talked about NT Warrior, which isn't that obscure. It's probably the biggest Mega Man ever got, but still.
Yeah,
and we mostly talked about how when those games in that cartoon released, people made fun of it at the time. Grown-ups did, because they're like, oh sure, one day everything's gonna have a computer built into it, and oh no, the oven's on fire because of a computer virus, and oh look at that's the world we live in today. A hospital can be knocked out by a cyber attack. Cyber terrorism is just normal terrorism now. So those games in that show, they wound up being very prophetic. It only took 20 years, but still. So
20 years is a blink of an eye to go from, imagine a phone that you can fit in your pocket to help. Someone has taken over my thermostat remotely and is demanding money.
Yeah. So, Brad and I, we had a good chuckle about that. Anyway, that's actually most of the Mega Man stuff I wanted to cover. I guess I will say I am pretty excited about, your issue. Partly because, again, I believe you can handle, the intense subject matter of the Zero series, but also I've seen the artist that they've got on board for this issue, and they're probably one of the few artists that I believe is up to the task of those crazy Reploid designs, the bosses and stuff.
Yeah, Heavy Metal Hanzo is no joke when it comes to art. He is awesome. So
yeah,
that's very exciting to have him working on an issue that Ian's writing. That's oh, okay. This is serious.
If anybody can, do a character like Aztec Falcon, or I don't know, Glacier Lake Tank, or Tritista Covert, they get a bunch of weird names. If anyone can do those designs justice, it's them. So
yeah.
And not that I can talk about it too much right now, but the tricky thing is that Zero's story is pretty tightly laced together. There's not a lot of gaps in that narrative. So I hope folks who do pick it up and see what I've done with it understand why I placed it where I did and why I did what I did with it.
Well, not talking about the comic, of course, because I haven't read it. But one thing I've thought for years and years, it always felt almost like there was a missing game. And I don't mean a 0-5. Originally there were only going to be 3 games. We're lucky we got the 4th one, which it's kind of funny. The first 3 games feel kind of like seasons of a show to me, just because of their consistency. And then the 4th feels like a movie made to follow it up and act as a series finale, just in its scope and its different tone and the humans and everything. Anyway, I've always wondered. It feels like there's a missing 1.5. What did he learn during that year he spent just wandering around the desert, taking down other Reploids? Because after a while in the Zero series, you get the feeling oh, he just remembers everything now. Yeah, he knows about Sigma and all the wars and the Maverick virus. He just doesn't talk about it. Even when they bring up the Eurasia incident in 0-4, no one really bats an eye at it. So it's okay, so he went from complete amnesia to he just knows now. When did he learn that? And that's where I always kind of imagined a 1.5. Anyway, I'm sorry for rambling and going on these.
No. And you say that, and I wonder if any of the radio dramas covered that.
That's a good point. I forgot about the radio dramas.
So, one thing I do think was a missed opportunity for the Legacy Collection. I wish that there was an option to switch the in-game music with the remastered tracks, for the Zero and ZX games. Because those are some amazing remixes.
Yeah. The 3DS, or not the 3DS, the DS does not really have the audio fidelity to do those tracks proper justice. I agree with you.
I know,
on that
but
one. It's like I would definitely have liked to have had the remastered songs. That would have been really cool.
And I'm sure somebody's modded it, so you can just take the music and do it yourself. But I wish they'd done it officially.
Right.
But oh well. Okay. So I guess that's basically everything I had to say about Mega Man and other stuff. So I guess I can talk a little bit about my series now.
Go for it,
please.
Okay. So, well, I gave you the gist of it already. I started like drawing the character and working on this world either very late 2013 or early 2014. I had some vague ideas of a series and a character I wanted to make, but nothing really solid until I was at somebody's birthday party. And I'd brought some paper with me, just in case I got bored, which I did. And for just a moment, this character flashed in my mind. And I thought, oh, shoot, I have to draw this now. Because if I forget about it, I might not get that back and they'll be lost forever. And so, I jotted them down and it all just kind of spiraled from there. And as things, continue and they grow, it becomes like ever scarier to look back and think, oh, shoot, if I hadn't like gone for it right then, none of this might have materialized. It's just, I'm sure that's happened to you where you get a great idea and you're like, oh, shoot, I better write this down now.
Mm-hmm. I believe it happens on a regular basis for Ian.
I was on a long road trip once and a very good idea occurred to me about 5 hours out of my final stopping destination. And it's like, hold on to this, keep this fresh. And I get to the hotel at some ungodly hour and I check and I really should be going to bed, but whip out the laptop because if I don't write it down, it's going to go away. I will not have it in the morning. I know this.
Like earlier, I brought up like structuring things around a page. So I started out, with fan fiction too. And I spent years and years just making just fan comics. And, they weren't very good, at least not at first, but I gradually learned. And the thing is like just the process of writing dialogue and hearing people's responses to it and just getting that constant feedback, it helped me gradually understand how normal people talk. It became less prose and felt more natural. And that was a big part of my development. It helped me live, with my autism and adjust. And even before that, like when I was growing up, I started drawing since I could first hold a pencil, since I first had the dexterity to curl my fingers around one. And at first I just drew stick figures and smiley faces and squiggles. But then, oddly enough, Thomas the Tank Engine, of all things, helped me learn how to draw faces. I grew up at the exact time when they were still in just those first few seasons. They had the models with the eyes that could move. And people make fun of it now, but that was perfect for like my generation of autistic people specifically, because it helped us understand what facial expressions mean. Because, they were kind of static and exaggerated like caricatures. And the camera would focus on them for a few seconds while George Carlin would tell you what the character was feeling. And that was more effective than any like adult in the room trying to explain it to me in person. So, that helped me with that. And eventually I got into things like Bionicle and Mega Man. And, I started drawing more humanoid characters. Eventually I started drawing actual people. And eventually, I started making fanfics. And I tackled all kinds of subject matter. I would like make a freaking Devilman comic just to see if I could handle that intense stuff. And then I would make something more kid-friendly by contrast. And by the time I figured I developed enough range, then I had the confidence to really pursue my own series. So, starting again very late 2013, early 2014, somewhere around there, it's a little fuzzy. I worked on it for a few years, and then I released the first 2 books on the same day in 2017. I had planned for them to be one big 300-page book, but that would have cost like $50 at the time, $60 now. So I figured that would scare people away. Yeah. So I found a good place to split it down the middle, add a couple scenes to the first part just to give it some kind of resolution and cutoff point. And I've just been releasing another one each year since. And it really has helped just as an outlet to help me grow. And anyone with like an autistic child and an autistic youth, I encourage you to, encourage their gifts, because it isn't just like, oh, they could make something of themselves one day with it. It could be like a form of therapy that helps them learn how other people interact and in turn, how to interact with them and so on. Wow, I went on another long tangent there.
No
Sorry.
worries. No worries.
Good message though.
I think so. Yeah.
Thank you.
And reinforcing that, for folks who are driven creatively, it is frustrating that you can't just do it. You see it in your head, you want it on the page, you just want it done, but it does take time to learn the craft and hone the craft to get it to a point where it can produce what you want. So good on you for sticking to it and getting it done and getting it out there.
Thank you. So, I've mentioned the character's, disability. She has a second one. So I'm sure you've seen, some of the art I sent, and you might have noticed she looks a little funny. Kind of looks like a Reploid. She is not a robot. She was born without arms or legs. She just has stumps, and she's needed prosthetics just to get around her whole life. So her quality of life, it improves over the series as she gets new, nicer, more comfortable limbs, more functional limbs, touch-sensitive ones in more recent books. And the funny thing is, we're able to make all that now, but it's the kind of future where they've forgotten a lot of old technology and regressed, and they're just now like rediscovering things that we can already do. That kind of future. But the most fun part is how it interfaces with her machine. Because she has this suit, it's like a big diving suit. Again, it's some of the art I sent. And it's too small to fit an entire person inside. But she's just a head and torso, so she can squeeze in there, and then it becomes her arms and legs. And that's how she goes adventuring and confronts the pirates and other threats. So I have a lot of fun, just designing and working all these things out.
Now, is this entirely you, or do you collaborate with anyone?
It's all me. I designed every character and ship and robot in this series, and then I draw the pages, and then I write the dialogue. Yeah, that's the funny thing. That's something I just remembered. So, when I was younger, and I was, again, mostly making fan fiction, even then I had, a basic grasp of some things that I didn't realize weren't exactly, normal at the time. One thing this other artist pointed out to me, someone that I really respected, they said they appreciate how, every page felt like its own little story. It had a natural cutoff point where, even if they just read, one page a day, it would feel almost like its own little thing. And I didn't even realize that was something I was doing accidentally at the time, but that became one of my drivers. That from that day, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make sure I keep doing that. I'm going to make sure every page, or even just every 2 pages, it tells something of a story in its own right. That's part of a wider thing.
I think that's a good thing to think about in terms of comics, because, when you look at a comic page, you see the page, and so the reader is focusing on a page, panel by panel, and then to have the end of the page be a good stopping point really does make sense. Yeah,
because it's easy for people to say something like, "Oh, I'm inspired by anime and manga style when it comes to the literal art." But one thing I appreciate about manga as opposed to some Western comics is they flow like storyboards, because they essentially are. Because, eventually they make an anime that just follows it panel by panel mostly. So they'll dedicate entire panels or even entire pages to just a solitary gesture or facial expression. The closest comic I can think of on our side that kind of fits that description is, again, the Ultimate Spider-Man comics. And each volume of that was basically a screenplay that you could easily imagine being turned into a movie. Even if it was just 1 hour long. And that's more or less how I've tried to structure my comics, to, make each one feel almost like a storyboard. Because I do hope for it to one day get animated, and so I've just tried to do half the legwork by making it easy to do that. But that's one thing that some of my favorite comics that you've made, Ian, they also kind of felt like that. Even if you had to cram a lot into just 4 parts, you managed to have the right connective tissue for it.
No, thank you. Something to keep in mind, though, with manga and the manga format is that while it is certainly more decompressed and allows for more fluid integration of the art from moment to moment versus the more Western styled compartmentalized panels, part of that comes from the absolutely brutal release schedule of manga. So the limited number of panels and the minimalistic approach and the big individual moments are just because it's easier to produce at a much faster pace. So as much as it is a very distinct artistic choice, I think it should also be kept in mind that there is a few external factors, some of them cold and capitalist, that do affect its production.
Unfortunately. Just to comment like a little more broadly on things like autistic representation, I don't much care for how like most stories depict, autistic people or even just neurodivergent people generally. Because a lot of them are ugly duckling stories where, this person is completely incompetent at everything, but, they have this one neat trick. They have this little thing they can do. It's like a gimmick or a superpower. And now suddenly people care about them because they have a utility, because they're useful. They didn't care about them before, but now they do. And
I hate
you
that.
see those. Yeah. And there are so many stories like that. And they're clearly written by people who aren't autistic themselves. Probably don't even know anybody who is. And it's like a tacit admission that they just can't think of anything more interesting to write about us. It's also like a tacit admission like, oh, well, I guess if the ugly duckling stayed ugly, then yes, all the other ducklings were right to pick on them. No, of course not. You don't want to send that message. So, like in Minno's case, she doesn't have, the one neat trick she can do, like counting super fast or whatever. There's enough stuff like that. People will ask, oh, what's her superpower? I'm saying, she just doesn't have one. You just see her autism and how she acts and her beliefs and approach to the world. And nobody in the story ever calls it out by name. You just see it and how she acts. And it's always nice to get a message from somebody saying that they've seen this in, their partner or a family member or even in themselves. There are so many people who aren't diagnosed, but definitely have it. Think about all the 80-year-old men, or even just 70-year-old men, who have 2,800 square feet of model railroads in their basement, who swear they're not autistic. Or, all the old ladies who knit obsessively, or have all these vast collections of china plates and stuff. Or they collect bottle caps or thimbles or, any other number of things. It's just because back when those people were young, we didn't have the tools. We didn't have the words for it, really. Now, we have a better understanding of it. And if it seems like there are more of us, well, no, we've just gotten better at detecting it. Anyway, you get the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
So many of these stories, when they're not doing that kind of gimmick, they just make us seem kind of detached and alien.
Yeah, that's always really weird to me.
Have either of you seen The Imitation Game?
I feel like you're going to describe it and I'm going to go, oh yeah, but I immediately say not sure.
Yeah, I don't believe so for me.
Well, it's about Alan Turing, the man who basically invented the computer in the final days of World War II. Okay. And the real Alan Turing was a gem of a man. He was, kindly and energetic, and he would always check on his interns. He talked to them, see how their lives were going. He was just a very vibrant and emotionally intelligent guy. And in the movie, they kind of portray him as a heartless monster. And I'm like, oh boy. So, I looked up the real guy after watching the movie, and I got a sense for who he was. But unfortunately, most people probably aren't going to do that. They're just going to watch the movie and think, yep, that's a pretty spot-on representation of autistic people. And so, there's so much stuff out there like that, where, it falls on, creators like me to push back against it by showing things from our perspective and humanizing us. So it's not like you even have to be this yourself to appreciate it. It's just about making it accessible and understandable. We're about 45 minutes into this.
Yeah.
I'm not ready to call it just yet, but I have
No
actually
worries.
blown through most of what I wanted to cover. There were a few other things I could cover, but probably off air. Well, again, I appreciate your writing. I appreciate your work on the Mega Man comics. I'm looking forward to what you're gonna churn out next. And I do hope that it leads to something more. I hope these one shots do well enough that you're able to continue with a longer project, even as just an outlet, because I think you're one of the right people for the job.
I do appreciate and I appreciate the appreciation, as glib as that sounds.
And I hope so too. I'm I want more Mega Man, and I want more Ian writing Mega Man, please. Let's have this happen.
and it's killing me because I can't talk about it because it's not really a thing right now, and it's not related to Capcom or anybody really. But there was a project that I was attached to that was very much Mega Man inspired, and I was brought onto the project because of my experience with the franchise, and my perspective on it really had a major influence on how they were going to go about a certain aspect of that project. And then they had to shelve it to focus on other priorities. And last I heard, it's like, yeah, we really want to get back to this. Are you still on board if we get it going again? It's like, yes, please. And I would love to hype it up and, tell you all about how cool it is and why you as a Mega Man fan would be hyped about it. But it's not even a thing. So it's like, here I am just like spouting noise about nothing. But believe you me, there was a time when I was working on a thing that you would have really liked. And maybe it'll be a thing one day.
And then you haven't made you haven't made anything anybody's liked ever since.
Sadly, no.
I'm kidding.
Well, I guess we could wrap it up in a moment. I'm just trying to think, like, there's got to be so much I can bring up to, like, go out on a high note. Oh, well, okay. There is, like, one other thing I would like to share about my series, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, like, the character's name. Yeah, it's a silly story, but I was down in Surrey, Maine. I was just walking along the beach, and I was trying to think of what to call the character. And I saw this little school of minnows at like high tide. And I just thought, Minnow. Yeah, that's a nice whimsical name. It makes her sound like small, kind of precious, but not infantilizing. That's another autistic thing. People tend to think of us as just adult-sized children. But yeah, that's how I came up with the character's name and even just the name Planet Ripple. I imagine, a world that's mostly flooded. And I figured, well, one of the only signs that somebody ever existed would be that moment when they touch the surface. And no matter how small they are, even if it's gone in like a second, it was still there. It was still proof that they existed, that they were important, that they were, just as valuable as anybody else. It's like the ocean remembers. It's the great equalizer. I also I have merfolk in it, like my interpretation of mermaids. And the idea is like they've been here as long as we have, if not much longer. And they're kind of funny. Like they have, their nostrils have moved to the top of their heads. So I have this one piece of art. It's one of my favorites to this day, where Minnow's holding like a merfolk toddler who's just meeting humans for the first time, and he's like touching her nose because he's confused that it's in the middle of her face instead of up on top where it's supposed to be, like on a whale or a brachiosaur. But like all the machines, all the boats and everything, they're inspired by sea creatures. I am fascinated by, the design language, if you could call it that, of ocean animals. I love the Darius games, where it's basically nothing but that. And, I've had fun, with my own designs. I just find, there are so many interesting species out there to draw from, especially ancient ones. Not that many people know what a Nomalocaris is. It's like one of the earliest predators that we know of. But it looks really cool as a giant robot.
Wait. I know this. I should know this. Is this the Precambrian thing?
Not Precambrian, just Cambrian. But yeah, it has these, it's like a shrimp with these two very long curling arms.
Yes. Oh my God, dude. Yes, absolutely.
I was so thrilled to see a Lystrosaurus in the last Jurassic World movie in the black market scene, because that's one of my favorite animals. There are so many cool animals, well before the dinosaurs, that most people don't know about because they weren't shown those animals in school, because there isn't a blockbuster movie about them. Just dinosaurs, basically. Mm-hmm. And occasionally something like a Dimetrodon will be grandfathered in as a dinosaur, but it isn't one. And there's just so many cool creatures before that. I wish there was a Permian park and a Cambrian park, because those animals, while they're a little funky and maybe a little smaller, I think they're every bit as cool and deserving of fame as the dinos.
Oh, absolutely,
definitely.
After each major extinction and life is refinding its niches, and it's like, does this work? Well, not really, but there's nothing really to compete against it. So sure, run with it. Why not?
Like, have you heard of Dunkleosteus?
Again, I feel like you're going to describe it. I'm like, oh yeah, that thing.
It's it's just a big beefy fish with, I almost said ship. Talking about the actual animal. Just a big beefy fish with like these plates over its head. And for a while it was depicted kind of like it had a turtle shell for a face, but these days, people like show skin over it. I made a machine out of that hits like a tank. I made a giant crab thing. I've made a lot of crab machines. Like there's the arrow crab. It's tiny, but its proportions are so crazy, it makes a spider crab look quaint. And there's just so many cool creatures like that make great inspiration for submarines and machines and all sorts of things. So that's been one of my big inspirations, and it's part of the series flavor. It's why I made the ocean such a big part of it. Anyway, I've been at it for years now, and again, I'm only about halfway done. I'm going to show things like how the world became flooded, reveal all the mysteries. But for the moment, I'm also dealing with a lot of social commentary. Like a big running theme throughout the whole thing is how people with disabilities are scapegoated and treated as disposable. And I take like some of the ideas that I see people actually suggesting in real life and go, hey, here's how horrific that would be if we actually tried it. But in the most family friendly way that I can. There's very little, like there's no, obscene cursing, very little like blood or violence. But I tackle heavy subject matter, mostly concerning, again, people with disabilities. But in a way that, anybody can understand and appreciate the perspective of.
That's great.
Thank you. And, it probably isn't too hard to see that one of the influences is, like Mega Man. I was obsessed with those games growing up. I loved all the art styles and all the enemy designs and stuff. Those games are a gold mine of intellectual property that's being completely wasted.
Yeah. Yeah, just squandered. Sat there.
But, we can at least go back and look at it. Anyway, okay, I've been going on for like an hour. Thanks for listening to me yap. Again, my stuff is on my website, planetripple.com. You can get my books through Amazon and Itch, or just find the links on my site. I also have a YouTube channel where I make my own videos, of course. It's funny, like, a couple times I've been at conventions and people have walked up to me because they recognized my work, but mainly because I advertise it at the end of some of my videos, and they go like, wait, are you the Lego Rewind guy? So, yes, I'm the Lego Rewind guy, but I also do this.
Come for Lego, stay for the minnow.
Yes.
And
of course, like, the villain is like the Pirate Queen Barracuda. A lot of the characters have fish names that kind of get across what they're about.
Nice.
Anyway, I've yapped enough, and we've been at this for about an hour. So thanks for hearing me out.
Thank you for sponsoring this episode and for sharing everything. It's a really compelling pitch. It's planetripple.com. Give it a look-see. I, for one, am sold on the very nature of having ships based on ancient sea life, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more, the actual meaningful social commentary, the deep and thoughtful philosophical origins of the names and what all is being put into the world, but also ancient sea life being battleships. What more do you want, people? Go read it right now.
That sounds awesome. Yes.
The first thing Minnow fights is a mantis shrimp themed machine that just hits really hard.
Nice. Good. All right. I think this is a good place to call it. Let's get out of here.
Thank you so much to Nick for sponsoring this BumbleKast special. If you want one of your own, head over to patreon.com/BumbleKast, Ko-fi.com/BumbleKast, or become a YouTube member. Be good to yourselves, be good to each other, go read Planet Ripple, and we will see you next time on the BumbleKast.
Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to the BumbleKast, a co-production of Bumble King Comics and the KNGI Network. Original theme music composed by Ken Coda Snyder. Remixed intro by T-Lopes. Find out more information, along with podcast feeder links, MP3 downloads, and more at bumbleking.com and kngi.org.
Kyle, how am I sounding?
You sound good. Nick sounds
good. How are you sounding?
Nick sounds good. I'm sounding, I don't know. You tell me.
I hear you fine.
Okay, good.
We are recording. Everything's going according to plan.
Correct. Yes, I am recording.
How odd. Like right out of the gate, everything's in alignment.
It's weird. It's weird. Our guest is here and is not having audio issues. This is very strange.
Hey, how's it going?
All right, we ready to start?
Yeah, I guess we'll just do.
Yep, let's go.